Let me ask you about your relationship with President Bush. Many people thought that you wouldn't get on precisely because of the difference of your politics.
You know, we continue, obviously, to disagree on certain aspects of politics, like climate change or even the Middle East peace process from time to time. And I'm a Democrat, not a Republican. But on the central question, after September the 11th of security, we were in agreement.
You say George W. Bush was very smart. He had an immense simplicity in how he saw the world. Right or wrong, it led to decisive leadership.
Yes, it did. And I think, you know, it's easy to mock that simplicity. And it's easy to ignore the strength that sometimes comes with that. And a decision like the surge in Iraq, you know, I can't think of many people who would have had the courage to take that decision in the way that he did.
Let's move on to Bill Clinton. You describe President Clinton, Bill Clinton, as your political soulmate. Why is that?
I think he was one of the first people really to understand, to articulate how progressive politics couldn't be a rainbow coalition, that you had to stand up and be connected with people, not activists simply.
And you say he was one of the smartest political minds you ever came across.
Oh, he's phenomenally smart. I mean, I think the smartest politician I ever came across, yes, I would say Bill Clinton, yeah.
You obviously had also a lot of dealings with him at the height of the Troubles when he was involved in the Monica Lewinsky scandal. There was the impeachment. How did you see him get through his political life at that point?
Just by the most extraordinary strength of character. I mean, you know, I came across him in some of the worst parts of all that impeachment business, and his ability somehow to kind of refocus on the job and get it done. I remember just sitting there thinking, I could not do that. If all that was going on around me, I just couldn't do it, but he did.
Let me ask you about your sort of view of why he got himself into this situation. I was also convinced that his behavior arose in part from his inordinate interest in and curiosity about people. In respect of men, it was expressed in friendship. In respect of women, there was potentially a sexual element. His curiosity led to that?
Well, you know, look, I think probably what I wrote is what I wrote. And I think if I try explaining it, I'll get into difficulty. I think that there are people who are part of his genius as a politician is he is extraordinarily curious about people.
You do address the issue of sex and politicians. You basically say, you know, in terms of why they take this risk.
Yeah.
You say, my theory is that it's precisely because of the supreme self-control that you have to exercise to be at the top. Politicians live with pressure, etc. So?
Yeah. So that's what you do, really. You live with pressure.
Affairs?
No, you live with pressure.
No, and then you say, you know, and your free bird instincts want to spring you from the prison of self-control. Then there's the moment of encounter, so exciting, so naughty, so lacking in self-control.
Yeah, so I'm trying to say, why is it? Because, you know, it's one of the things, you know, you come across when you're a political leader, obviously, that you see people getting, you hope you never get mixed up in something like that, but you see that situation develop. People today want to know so much more about their politicians. If they do, they've got to understand they're also human beings. And you've got to be somewhat forgiving, therefore, of the human frailty. I think that's my view.
You talk about the human frailty of alcohol as well. You say the relationship between alcohol and prime ministers is a subject for a book all of its own. What was your relationship with alcohol?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I decided to write about it in the book, thought about it actually, because you've got to be careful writing about these things.
But no, was it a prop for you? Did it become a prop? You talk about a stiff whiskey or a gin and tonic before dinner, a couple of glasses of wine. Not excessively excessive. I had a limit, but I was aware that it had become a prop.
You've got to be careful of it being a problem. At some points, it can be. Now, I was never quite sure, because sometimes, you know, it's a relaxation at the end of the day, and it's this year for the first time. My wife had been on me to do this for ages. I gave it up for Lent, right? So I went for the 6 weeks without it. It was interesting.
You talk about Cherie, your wife, giving you support and soothing you. You say, on that night of 12th of May 1994, I needed that love that Cherie gave me selfishly. I devoured it to give me strength. I was an animal following my instinct, knowing that I would need every ounce of emotional power and resilience.
Yeah, I'm going to blush now.
Racy, that, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to blush now. So it's that you write these passages and they stay in, and then when you read them in the cold light of day, you think, should I really have written that in that way? But anyway.
I'm struck by so much of the tone of the book, you sort of going from kind of gung-ho, courageous bravado to really gut-wrenching fear. Because you have this amazing passage about Prime Minister's questions.
The Prime Minister knows I was given no sight of that dossier. I wasn't even contacted about it. So he can retract that for a start.
PMQs was the most nerve-wracking, discombobulating, nail-biting, bowel-moving, terror-inspiring, courage-draining experience in my prime ministerial life, without question.
It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. In fact, one of the funny things is when people in the US often say to me, you know, don't you miss Prime Minister's questions? And I miss Prime Minister. It's like asking a guy, you know, who's been on the rack for 10 years whether he'd like a stretch. I mean, it's...
How did you get over it?
I ended up understanding it was also a physical exercise, this Prime Minister's question. So I used to eat differently and take a banana to give me energy before going in. And you had to confront what is the fear. And the fear in the end is being made to look completely ridiculous, which is a very human fear.
Do you still feel it at that time every week?
Absolutely. Every week at 3 minutes to 12 on a Wednesday, wherever I am in the world, there is a chill that comes upon me. It hasn't left yet.
Shortly after you became Prime Minister, you met Princess Diana. What did you think of her?
She was an extraordinary, engaging, amazing, beautiful, iconic figure.
You said that Buckingham Palace sort of saw her as a threat.
Well, they admired her, but she was such a sort of, in one sense, she was such a different type of person that for a very traditional monarchy, this was you know, as I say, it was a kind of meteor coming into what had been a fairly well-disciplined, well-ordered ecosystem, and that obviously had a big impact on her with big consequence.
And when she died, that created a whole nother set of realities. You called her the People's Princess, and you also had to kind of get the Queen and the Buckingham Palace to understand that there was a huge wave sweeping the country.
People felt an enormous sense of loss, and so I think what was very important was for the monarchy to be able to, at that sort of supreme point of difficulty, to just pivot somewhat and come to an understanding with the people where they reached out and accepted that there was that strength of emotion.
I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death.
And in the end, the Queen did that, I think, magnificently, actually, and did it with a pretty flawless instinct, in fact. But it was difficult. It was difficult for me because I was a new Prime Minister, and I didn't really know the Queen.
You talk about going up to, I think, Balmoral in Scotland to have the annual royal barbecue. The Queen was actually there stacking dishes?
There is an annual event, which is the Prime Minister goes and spends a weekend with the Queen at Balmoral. The procedure there is that the cooking and the cleaning up is done by the royal family itself. So you have this slightly odd situation where you're sitting there and obviously very nervous around the Queen who you've grown up with and so on, and Prince Philip's doing the cooking and the Queen's stacking the plates and doing the washing up. It's a slightly unnerving experience, actually, but it was, I mean, they do it very graciously and in a really lovely way.
Well, on that note...
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony Blair, for joining us.
Thank you.
Watch more of what Tony Blair says about third-way politics, the right-wing press, and his difficult relationship with his successor, Gordon Brown, on our website at abcnews.com/thisweek.